It's not gonna fit. The square is not gonna fit into the circle hole. It doesn't work that way. The triangle is not gonna fit in the square hole. Weren't you 1 years old one time? Weren't you 2 years old one time? Were you not 3 years old once upon a time years ago when you were younger? After you were 1 years old, were you not 2 years old? Before you were 3 years old, were you not 2 years old? Did you not ever play with blocks? Do you ever play Tetris? Do you hear the music from the Nintendo version of Tetris, which is possibly the first version of the Tetris game that I've ever played? And there are plenty of different puzzle games and block games in real life with actual blocks and Tinker Toys and other gadgets, and in video games and computer games are video games, even though some people say, well, they're different. Video games is one thing and computer games are another, but a video game system is a computer. It computes and processes just like a computer, and it runs off of electricity or possibly batteries, and does computing and computer things like a calculator is a computer. So is video games, and Tetris started out on computer games and video games like the Nintendo Entertainment System, which is the NES, which Nintendo came out with in 1985, specifically the year 1985. But they were doing things and making games before that, and the company started in the 1800s, like the 1860s or so, making regular card games, not video games, because they didn't really have a lot of electricity back then, since the light bulb was barely invented back then at that time in the 1800s. But things were getting better, and electricity was coming, and things were being invented, and the printing press was already invented at that point, since it's been around for like 100 or a few hundred years, like since like the 1500s. So things were getting better, but Nintendo was just making card games, just like playing cards, I mean, in the 1800s, for like the next few decades until like maybe the 1950s or 1970s. At some point they started making electronical things, and then they came out with their own game console to compete against Atari in other video game systems and possibly computer systems, and they were there in the competition, and we all love competitions, and we all love reviews. This video is a review where I review something and talk about something. And I have I have a couple different series of the different kinds of reviews, like reviewing films, that is film reviews. In other words, movie reviews that you find in a home video, in a DVD or a VHS, or downloaded onto your computer legally or illegally, and in the cinema, the big screen, like a play, like in the theater. We're talking video, movie, film reviews, and then also television reviews and video game reviews and food reviews, where I talk about food, my favorite foods, or I talk about one food per video, and word reviews, where I talk about one word per video, and then my life. There's a playlist, there's a series about my life where each video is about a different story in my life, a different event in my life, or what has actually happened, my autobiography, my journal, my diary. So we have all these different reviews, and this is a video game review. Are you bored yet? Well, it's still exciting because I'm talking about one of the greatest puzzle games. And so there are spoil alerts. You might be spoiled. Just like when people talk about a movie review, they say spoil alert, spoiler alert, because they don't want to spoil you. But if you want to be spoiled, go ahead and watch those videos, because they will ruin the ending and the plot to the end of the movie. That's what a spoiler alert is. And so I'm saying right now, in this video game review, where I reviewed this one video game, and that is Tetris, for this video, I say, while I'm reviewing it, spoil alert. But there aren't any spoil alerts, and you are bored because you're like, man, this is boring. This is more boring than playing Tetris. Playing Tetris is not boring. It's a puzzle game, and it plays with your mind, and it may hurt your mind, and it may make your mind bleed like I might make you bleed. I might, I might make you bleed if I say too much of the same old that you may hear in other videos I've made, or if you don't like my face, or if anything of my race, or anything you can think of if I'm too repetitious, because you've heard me say these things like, oh, this is a review, and here are spoiler alerts. You're gonna be spoiled like a one-child person in a family where the parents only have one child. I've said that in other videos, and you may be sick out of your mind if you hear me say the same old things, and I will continue to repeat myself in videos. So if you don't like it, stop watching my videos and leave a comment below and say how much you hate it. Or email me at originaloatmeal@gmail.com and leave me comments and like it or unlike it so that YouTube might delete my videos and delete my account and take me off the face of the planet like Hitler did with the Jews. And it's possible, and you could do that, and you can try your best and get a bunch of people to hate me or to like me and to subscribe to me. Do I stutter? Did you stutter? Did I stutter? I did. But when you play Tetris, you cannot stutter. You should not stutter. You cannot hesitate. You gotta go full. You gotta go full. You gotta be full. Is your cup half empty or half full? Is it half empty or half full? Is it almost full or almost empty, or is it somewhere in the middle? What is it? What kind of person are you? A positive person or a negative person? Use to be a positive person while you are playing Tetris, and do your best. Use your head. Don't take drugs, and put the pieces together. You know that squares do not fit in circle holes. Unless if the square is a lot smaller than the hole, then it might fit in, but that's a given, and that's common sense, and of course that may work. But if it's about the same size, it's not gonna fit. If you ever been a 2-year-old, you may know that because you've had those little baby toys that you played with, and then Tetris is like an advanced version of those baby toys on video games that you play on your TV screen or computer monitor. And monitors are like televisions and like the screens you have on phones and possibly like iPads and other devices like iPods too, and anything with a screen where you see pictures, moving pictures, like you find moving pictures and videos and things like that. Anytime you have that, you have the commonality of all the different kinds of screens out there, and TVs and monitors and cell phones and iPads and iPods and this and that, and anything that James Bond has as well. Unless if you want to say and argue, it doesn't matter what James Bond has, because James Bond's just like Peter Pan and Michael Jackson, because they're not real, except Michael Jackson is real, except for maybe his nose. But then he went off and faked his death, or he was murdered, or maybe he just died because it was an overdose. One of those three options, unless if there's other options or combinations of the options. But never mind that. That was then. He's gone, or he's allegedly gone. Maybe Michael Jackson is allegedly gone, as in they say he's gone. They gone. Did I say they? I mean he. They say he's gone, so he must be gone, whether or not he's actually dead, like Elvis, or not. Is Elvis dead? I don't know. Did Hitler actually die? Did they ever find his body? Or did he go to the moon, or to the center of the earth, or to some crazy unknown place on the earth that nobody really knows about and was seeking to get revenge? Did they really kill? Did they really kill Osama bin Laden when they said they did? Or did he die years ago? Or is he still alive? Did Saddam really die? Well, Saddam's a little more concrete because I think they actually showed his execution. And if I actually see an execution, I'm more likely to believe it. Even if it was, George Lucas, as in, George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars. Even if it was like digitally re-enhanced with special effects and faked, which they can fake things, and sometimes they do fake things, even with things where they say it actually happened, like the Boston bombing and different things. But in life, it's gonna be confusing, and you won't really know what is what all the time. You won't know, and we do not know everything with all the different things that happens in life and the things that don't happen in life that they say actually happened and did not happen, and the things that happen, and the mysteries and the puzzles and all these things, just like the puzzles of the Tetris. And life is hard to put together. It's hard to put the pieces together in real life with the things that actually happen. With, what about 9/11? Was it planned? Was it just terrorists? Was it a conspiracy? Was it partly bombed? If you look at the way that the buildings fall down, which they actually do fall down straight down instead of like sideways. If you look at the videos, you may see that. And that was the original videos because I was there when they showed it live. Unless if when they showed it live it wasn't the actual videos there and it wasn't the actual original. But never mind that, as far as I'm concerned, the videos you see now in conspiracy theories about 9/11, about what happened in the year 2001, September 11, when the terrorists hijacked planes and crashed them into the World Trade Building, World Trade Center, those two towers, really tall towers in New York City of the United States of America, and also into like the Pentagon in Washington D.C. When that happened, it may have really happened. It really did. I mean, it did happen, but how did it happen? Was it a setup? Was it a conspiracy? Did the government know, or did like the United Nations know, or did the New World Order know? Different like governments or secret organizations that may or may not be real. With I think that some organizations, some secret organizations may be real. I think they are real to an extent, but we may not know everything about them exactly and what they do or what they're trying to do, but we kind of do, and I believe that there are organizations out there and people out there that are seeking a one world government, and they're setting that up, and 9/11 was part of it. But and then you have the question of, did man really land on the moon? But I'm gonna say that man did really land on the moon, regardless of what they may say about that conspiracy. And with 9/11, I say that it wasn't just Osama bin Laden involved. He had something to do with it, and somehow he he was doing that, and he got people to crash some planes into those buildings. I believe that Osama bin Laden was a part of that, that he got those people to crash the planes into the buildings. But I believe that there may have been other things that were happening at the same time. I believe that there may have been bombs that helped the buildings fall to the ground as the planes were crashing into the buildings. There may have been bombs that went off at the same time because planes may not be strong enough to actually knock down a building. And you may want to talk to scientists and architects and talk to them and ask them about the speed and the size and other details of the planes that hit those buildings, and they may or may not tell you everything exactly of whether or not it would have knocked down those buildings, and that would tell you whether or not the planes were the only thing that knocked down those buildings in 9/11, or whether or not there had to be other things involved, like bombs or whatever else that may or may not knock down a building. And that's the puzzle of life. The puzzle of life is when we look at things and we have to figure out, did that happen or did this happen? Did the Boston bombings happen in the year 2013? Did that really happen? Or was that a setup and a distraction so that we would not focus on other things that's happening at the same time? And sometimes there are actually distractions that distracts us, and things happen whether they be real or not, whether they be a real problem or not a real problem, or somewhere in the middle, a mix and combination of an actual problem and a not actual problem that was, you know, fabricated and faked and things like that. And a lot of things are mixed in that combination of real and not real, a combination of it really did happen, but then there was also other things involved that were not totally real, as in it was a setup, and you know, things like that. And life is full of those things, and every day we have the choice to believe in this, to believe in that, in the news. But unfortunately, when we watch news and when we read news and hear about news and think about news, we do not hear everything, and we cannot hear everything. We cannot know everything. We cannot read everything and hear everything and see everything and smell everything. We cannot know everything and feel everything, which means that we do not know the whole story and both sides of stories, of the news, of things that happens, of events, of its historical events, with the news reports of recent historical events, which we don't really refer to historical events. We don't refer to these things as historical events because they just recently happened, so there's like recent history, but there's still a history nonetheless. And we listen and we may or may not believe in the things that happen, that they tell us in the news, but most of the time, most people believe in most of the things that they hear in um, the news, you know, on TV and radio and in books and magazines and on the internet now, and Facebook and Twitter and other websites, and you know, newspaper websites that are, you know, not just newspapers now in physical paper that you get from a Paperboy, which is a video game as well from the 1980s. That's when it started. They started making a video. They started making a video game in the 1980s called Paperboy, and you get the newspapers in real life, but now also on the internet as well. And you have all these different news sources in real life and on computers and TVs and cell phones and news feeds, and we look at them and we can think about it, and a lot of people disbelieve in the things they hear, and they just do it without thinking, because we usually do not want to think too much, and we just take things as is. But sometimes we need to think a little bit more, and sometimes we need a little bit more critical thinking. And the things that will help us and can help us with critical thinking, with helping us, think about things and to problem solve, is puzzle games and other like games, puzzle games, other things, including, for example, the game and the video game called Tetris, which is what this video is about. This video game review is about. The game called Tetris was, I think, started in the 1980s and may have started on the Nintendo Entertainment System, and then has came out on computers and other video game consoles like Nintendo's game consoles like the NES and Super NES and Nintendo 64 and PlayStation and the Sega Genesis and other video game consoles, because Tetris is popular. People like puzzles. But then people are not always relating puzzles to the real world. They're not applying themselves or applying one thing to another. They're not connecting the dots when they should. And they should. And they should think about it. And they should connect the dots and say, if I can use my brain to solve problems with video games, games, things like that, of the not so real world, of the not real world, since games and sports and video games are not real. If I can use my brain to problem solve games, to win games, to get to the end of the game and to solve the problems and to win, since I want to win, since I want to be number one. If I can problem solve, if I can solve puzzles and win games, if I can beat the video games, get to the end and beat the head boss at the last level, if I can solve these puzzles and riddles and poems, then I could also solve real puzzles or better puzzles. Not to say that video game puzzles are not real, but to solve better puzzles and riddles and things in actual real life. Not to say that video games are not real, but to say that real life is a little more real. And if I can solve puzzles in games and video games and other things, then I could certainly solve problems in the more real world, and to connect the dots and to problem solve and to think about the different things that are happening in the news, the things that they tell us in the news, and the things that they do not tell us in the news, the things that they leave out, which makes things a little more complicating and sad and confusing, because when you listen to the news, you hear parts of the story, and it doesn't matter how accurate it is and how truthful it is. When you do not hear everything or enough of a story, it's like you're being lied to. And I don't really have an example with me right now. Or maybe I do. Maybe, like, say for example, you hear a story and they say there was a fire and there was 5 people inside that building that was on fire. Thank you for watching the news. Now everything they said was true. And this is only an example. It might be a bad example, crazy illustration that I am making right now. but I'm trying my best to make a point, and that is, you hear the story, and this is my example. Listen, you have some people, like say 5 people in a building, and the news reporter says there was 5 people in the building, and the building was on fire. Everything they're saying is true, and you know that, and you can know that, and you could remember that, and we know that, and a lot of times we have arguments and debates about whether or not something is true, but that's not what is important completely. There's more to it, because it's not just about what you're told, it's also about what you are not told, which is very important. And we are not told everything sometimes when they tell us something in the news. And so in this example, they say there was a fire and there were 5 people in it, and that's all they say. But they may not say, oh, and then later on, guess what? Those 5 people got out of the building. Now, I'm using this example to try to make a point that sometimes they do not tell you everything. It's an extreme example that may not actually ever happen. They may never actually say something exactly and specifically like that, specifically speaking. They may never say something like that, where they say, oh, there was a fire and there were 5 people in it. Thank you for listening to the news. Because usually when they report a story like that, where there's a problem kind of like that, they say there were 5 people, there were a fire, but they're okay now and they escaped. But in my example, never mind what they actually do in a story like that, that's not my point. My point is that they do not tell you everything. They do not always tell you everything, and that is like being lied to. Like in my story, in my example, where they say there were 5 people and there was a fire. The 5 people were in the building and there was a fire. The end. Or thank you for listening to the news. And now to the next top story, the next top news story. And they continue talking about other things. Because when you leave out important details, then it's like you could say, oh, I did not lie, I just did not say everything. But you are misleading people, which is pretty much the same thing as lying. And it's pretty severe when you mislead people and lead people astray by not telling them important details that you leave out. So you can tell them the truth and nothing but the truth, but if you do not tell them other things too that are the truth as well, then you may be misleading them. It may or may not be happening. In some cases, it may not actually happen if the people are smart enough or whatever. But in some cases, you may mislead them, and it's dangerous and it's harmful and it's counterproductive. It is counterproductive when you lie to people or when you mislead people, which is pretty much the same as lying, like a white lie, when you do not tell people the truth and enough of the truth. Like in my example, they say there was a fire and there was 5 people in that building, in that fire, and that's all they tell you. They stop right there, but they forget to say, oh, and by the way, those 5 people escaped the building later on and they weren't consumed by the fire. And so they leave out important details, and then that may cause people to think bad things and to fear and to begin to question life and disasters and think, oh no, a fire may eat me and consume me and burn me to death like it did those 5 people. Even though those 5 people did not get killed because they escaped, but the news reporter did not tell you that. But you're still thinking that, and the news reporter did not lie to you. Technically speaking, the news reporter did not tell a lie because they did not say whether or not those 5 people were killed in the fire. They just did not say anything at all, and they left it out. And that's the very important factor that makes life better or worse. When you leave things out, it can fundamentally crush or shift or change things for the better or worse. Usually for the worse. When you leave things out, it's not good. In some cases, it may be good to leave certain details out in limited situations and circumstances, but you have to be very careful. You have to be very careful when you make those decisions to leave things out. And life is that kind of mystery, full of mysteries and puzzles, and you are here to consider them. Like Tetris, you want to solve the puzzles, like a word puzzle, or all these different games. They have all these different puzzle games, video games, board games, all these different kinds of games that you can imagine that involves your brain, because we need to use our brain to problem solve problems and to do more critical thinking, especially because we need to use our brains. And when we do not use our brains, we begin to lose our brain. As we get older, we usually stop thinking as much. We stop critically thinking as much as we did when we were younger. When we were younger, and the younger we were, the more we used our brain to an extent. And maybe we only use 10% of our brain at the maximum now, and we don't really get to the potential of our brains and use 100% of our brains nowadays in the last few hundred years or since the dawn of time or whatever. But then nonetheless, we should try our best to use as much of our brain as possible and to keep as much of our brain that we still have as much as possible, whether or not that be 10%, which is our best, or 100%, or somewhere in between, or less than 10%. It does not matter exactly. It matters in a way, but we can't do everything, and we can't stop things from getting worse all the time or completely. And so we have to just focus on what we can do in what we do have, whether that be 100% of our brain or 10% of our brain or other numbers or something else. We cannot worry too much about, oh, I can only use 10% of our brain, of my brain, or a little bit more or a little bit less. Do not worry too much, just try your best. And if you do not use your brain, eventually as you get older, if you don't use it, you lose it. So you need to hurt yourself in a way, but in a good kind of way, like they say, no pain, no gain, and better safe than sorry, and better late than never, or better sooner the better. The sooner the better, which is a lot better than better safe than sorry. I mean better late than never. It's better sooner than late. It's better late than never, but it's also better sooner than late, including in how we use our brains. And we should use our brains as much as possible. And that is why in this video game review where I review the video game called Tetris. Tetris. This is why I recommend that you play Tetris. No matter how old you are or young you are, the older you are, the better. The younger you are, the better. I do not care exactly, except that I do care exactly about you, that you get better, that you increase in your ability to critically think about problems in video games and puzzles and in the real, more real world of when you hear things about, you know, world news, local news, or problems with your families or friends, or problems at work or at school, or the different people that you run into, or in your community, or whatever. You will run into puzzles and problems and stories, and you will hear truth, but you will not always hear all the truth and nothing but the truth, and enough of the story and both sides of the story, which may lead you to insanity. It may make you crazy, or you may not realize the harm that is being done, and you may not know the problems that are happening until years later, or you may never know. And that's the thing about life, it's full of these kinds of puzzles and complexity and paradox. Paradox. How do I say paradox? Life is a paradox. It's full of these mysteries and puzzles, and you should train your mind to better prepare yourself for when those puzzles come to you. In video games, which you kind of have more control over, you should prepare yourself for when they come in the virtual reality world, the not so real world of video games and board games and all those different things, and in all the different shapes and sizes and vehicles that they come in, all the different packages that they may come in, whether that be, in a board game or a video game or other things. You should prepare yourself for when they come in video games, but also when they come in the real world. You should be ready, as in the more real world. Not to say that video games are not completely real. They're just not as real. They're just real in a different sense. But you probably know what I mean, because this is usually what other normal people say. They say, video games not real, the real world is real, kind of thing. And I know what they mean. I'm here to say, well, it's not that simple to just separate the two and say, yeah, you put the video games in the not real box, and you put the real world in another box, because sometimes things overlap. Sometimes things kind of intermix and are gray and not just black and white. You could say the real world is white and real and pure. That's the real world in that box over on this corner. And then you can say, oh, video games are black, which is the opposite color of white over here. Video games, black, and over here on the totally opposite side is white of the real world. And you could say, hey, video games, black, not real. Video games in this box. Real world in the white box. The real world in the white box over here, separated, completely separated from video games. And video games over here on the other side, completely on the other opposite side and corner in a black box. Black box, video games, not real. White box, the real world, totally real, and more real than video games. But sometimes in life, Things are kind of in the middle, in the gray area. Things are in the middle, and that's when things become more tricky and mysterious, full of puzzles, where you need to wake up and open your mind and be more open-minded and flexible and listen with your ears and your eyes with your intuition and think more than you ever think, and think until you begin to bleed in your brain, but not too hard, because you need to take a break and get some water and take a nap to pace yourself. But things are tricky at times, and life can be simple and more simple, and I want things in life to be more simple, but at the same time things are really not simple, and they're complex, and oh, it's a long story kind of thing with all these different things, because in our lives what we see is gray. We do not see, oh, white and black. We try to see white and black, and to an extent, at times we do see a little bit of black and white, but we do not know everything. We are not perfect, so we do not see absolutely of the time all of the good things and white things of the whiteness, and the bad things of, like, the blackness, as in, things that are wrong and things that are right, or things that are this and things that are that. Instead, things are not just black and white, or white and black. Things are gray. And we look at the gray and we can kind of see, oh, this is a little darker than that, and this is a little more lighter than that, and so this must be white, and this must be gray. But then somebody else looks at the same things and saying, oh no, that is more gray. No, that is more black, and that is more white. And then you say, no, that is more white, and that is more black. And then the other person says, no, that is more white, and that is more black. And then another person says, well, no, actually, that is more white, and that is more black. But it's all gray, because we're blind. And so if we're colorblind, so we don't really know what is black and what is white. We can do our best, but we need to remember that it's hard. Even though life is supposed to be simple and can be simple at times in different situations, circumstances, through different factors, and certain things are simple when we begin to figure those things out and solve those certain puzzles and mysteries. Sometimes things become more clear and simple, but we cannot have that guarantee absolutely in all things all the time, and so we need to be a little more careful, not be too confident and overconfident and proudful, full of pride, where we're just so confident that we're like, well, this is simple and that is simple, and therefore this is also simple. We cannot always make those conclusions, those premature conclusions. We cannot always make those premature conclusions, because we're not technically and always perfect in all things, in everything. So we have to be a little more humble and careful when we try to solve the problems and mysteries in life, because even though things are black and white, we do not always know where to put the different puzzle pieces and where things belong in every single thing all the time, perfectly, technically, completely, in whether or not something is black or white, whether something would be moral or immoral, whether something be right or wrong, or hot or cold, or the two extremes of opposites, polar opposites. And they say opposites attract, but in this, I don't exactly know, because you would not exactly want to say that. opposites attract, as in what is right is attracted to what is wrong. But sometimes in relationships that kind of happens where opposites attract, where a good person or a better person may be attracted to a not better person. Like, a good little girl may be attracted to a bad boy. Oh yeah, I like the bad boys, and that may happen at times. And opposites may attract. But whether or not they belong with each other is another story. It's a little more specific and complicated than simply something that you want to just like, say mini miny mo and say, well, this would make a nice story in like a movie or in a book. You may want to say those things and say, well, yeah, I like the idea of opposites attract, and I want to write a story about it, or I want to live that kind of life where I fall in love with somebody who completes me because they're my opposite. But in life, that may or may not be the best thing for you, because life is not always that clear, and so we need to be careful, and we need to begin to increase in our wisdom, in our intuition, in our ability to critically think in processing information, in the truth that we are told, but also in the truth that we are not told. In other words, we need to be mindful of the things that we're not told, like in a news report, and we need to think about that and think, well, maybe we were not told everything about like this event, like the Boston bombing or 9/11 or something that happens in the news, in the world news or national news or local news or state news or in whatever country that you live in or state or wherever you live. You have to remember that politics is corrupt for the most part. And so, therefore, the news is also corrupt because the news is interwoven and interconnected with the politics, with the government, the powers that be, the higher powers that be, that runs and controls the different countries, which is also kind of connected to an even higher power of a new world order, of a one world power, which is coming up, whether you like it or not. And you can call me crazy and say, well, that's never going to happen, but it is happening. And you should trust me, or you do not have to trust me, like I'm saying in this video, and do your own homework. And doing your own homework is very important, and that's what puzzles promote. Like Tetris promotes your homework. And thinking on your own and being self-driven, self-motivated, which is something I started doing when I was 8 years old, like especially when my mom told me to do some homework, like math homework, like Kumon math homework or something like that at home, since I was homeschooled. So it's like I was doing schoolwork, I was doing homework, but then my mom left and I was 8 years old in the year 1993, and I could have like not did it because it's like she's not around, but my integrity started thinking about it. My integrity is the part of the character, the purest part of my character that nobody sees, and my integrity and my character started thinking about that, and then I started thinking about being determined and self-motivated, and I said to myself, if I don't do it now, then I may never do it. I may never decide to do things on my own, and therefore I will be dependent on other people, and I will not be independent enough to do things on my own, to think on my own, to have that freedom to make my own decisions in what I believe, in what I do, and what I choose to do in my life, and how I react and act and proact in different situations and activities and circumstances and different factors. And I need to begin now. And that's when I started thinking about that when I was 8 years old, and that's something we should do when we are younger. The sooner the better for being self-motivated and determined and driven at a younger age. We need to start doing that, and puzzles and games helps you with that, in being independent on your own, to think on your own, not to just let people turn you into a robot with the propaganda, to be a slave, to go with the flow, the status quo, and just to think like everybody else, to be a slave, a clone, a robot, a puppet to the higher powers, the governments and new world order that tries to brainwash you and manipulate you and try to make you think certain things through propaganda and advertisement and things in the mass media, in movies and TV and radio and books and everywhere. It's everywhere, doing things, playing with our minds. But we need to be independent enough to think on our own and to decide for ourselves what we want to believe and what we do not want to believe, when it's hard at times to know what is true and what is not true, especially when they tell you what is true, but they do not tell you everything. Like I told you in my example, they say there was a fire and there were 5 people inside, and that's all they tell you. And they stop the news story right there. They just tell you there's a fire and there was 5 people in that fire, and they let you imagine the rest and fill in the blank, which kind of makes them not guilty because they did not tell you anything, but they're kind of misleading you, and they kind of want you to think that those 5 people were consumed by the fire and they died, and now those people, the news people, are actually filling you with doubts or possible doubts and thoughts of fear and intimidation, of being scared of, oh no, fire is going to get me. Or maybe the story is about terrorists, that there was a terrorist attack or a bank robber, and let's just say terrorists, and the terrorists are in the building with those 5 people. Like, oh, there's these 5 people in a building with terrorists, and then they had guns, and yeah, thank you for watching. And then you may think, oh no, there were terrorists, and those 5 people died, because the news reporters don't tell you whether or not those 5 people died or not. So they tell you only the truth, but they do not tell you all of the truth, and they do not tell you everything. They do not tell you enough. So you have to fill in the rest of the blanks of what they do not tell you. And that is misleading, just like lying is also misleading. And it can corrupt you and consume you and take you down a path of the dark side of the Force of Star Wars that you do not want to go down. And it's tricky, and it's part of psychology of how they can brainwash you like that. But it happens every day, and it happens to all of us to different extents. And when I say all of us, I mean all of us, including me, to different extents. Things affect us. Things do affect us, whether we like it or not, and whether or not we're aware of it or not. Things affect us, and we need to grow up and begin to realize that certain things affect us, and certain stories can affect us in the way we think without us even knowing. Like when they tell us a story that, oh, there was a fire, or there was these terrorists in this building, and there was these 5 people in there, and it got ugly, and thank you for watching the 5 o'clock news or the 10 o'clock news, and they stopped right there. so that, number one, they're not lying. So they did not lie, but maybe they were misleading you, because number two, they did not tell you everything, or they did not tell you enough of the story. So number one, they did not lie, so that keeps them from going to jail, because they did not actually technically lie, they just did not tell you everything, which is misleading. So number one, they did not lie, so they keep themselves safe, like, Dexter leaves no trace, so that, when he kills bad people in the TV series on HBO, Dexter, the serial killer, who is a blood splatter analysis for the Miami Metro Police. In the TV show called Dexter, on their 8th season right now, Dexter covers his tracks. So the news and people in the higher powers and higher organizations, they cover their tracks as well. Leave no trace. Don't get caught red-handed. Don't let people know that, oh, you were behind it. So it's like, number one, they do not lie. The news reporters do not lie, or they try not to lie as much. So number one, they do not lie. And number two, they tell you some truth, but they do not tell you everything. So when you... Was that number two? I can't remember now. But they do not tell you enough. They cover their tracks so that they do not get accused of lying, or they do not get, like, impeached. Like, you're a president, you do not get impeached and thrown in jail for lying or doing something bad, because they cover their tracks like Dexter covers his tracks. So you do not get caught. So number one, that's what they do. They do not lie. They do not get caught. But number two, they still do something that's bad, or almost bad, or kind of bad, in the gray area, like a white lie, where they do not tell you everything, which affects you, and they do something to make you think something, and they know how to input certain feelings and thoughts into you through different methods, like not telling you everything. Like, if they were to tell you, yeah, there were terrorists, and they set off a fire. There, I'm combining the two stories together. The terrorists set off a fire in a building where there were 5 people inside. There were 5 people inside. The terrorists set off a fire in that same building where the 5 people were. Thank you for listening to the news. Now to the next news story. They tell you that, and they word it a certain way for a reason to say to you, without actually saying it, terrorists are so bad and they're gonna kill you, just like they killed these people. When really they did not actually kill those people, because the people escaped the fire, but they do not tell you that, because they don't want you to know that the 5 people escaped. They probably don't want you to know. You could argue and say, well, maybe they did not have time to tell us, and maybe it's not important that those people escaped the fire, that is, the terrorist attack, and maybe they had to go on to talk about other top news stories, because, time is limiting. You could say that. However, I will still say, no, I do not think so. I do not think that's what happened. It may happen sometimes, to an extent, that they run out of time, so they cannot tell you exactly everything. But you need to draw a line somewhere, and you need to critically think about this, that when certain things are left out, it may lead you down a road through like some thought processes that may lead you down a path, a life course that may affect you and may change the way you do things in your daily life. And that is called control. When the mass media, when the news, when the government is able to say certain things to make you do certain things. And they know how to do it because they have scientists and they have writers and propaganda manipulators and all these different people, and they can meet together and they know the science and the psychology behind it and the sociology, and and they know how to manipulate people and to brainwash people by saying certain things in certain ways and by not saying certain things that can lead a bunch of people in a country down certain paths of the way they think, which motivates the way they do certain things, and then you gain more power and influence over those people. And that's what people in power want. They want more power and influence. So they will do anything they can to maintain that power and influence. And that is why in this video I'm here to say puzzles are good because it helps your brain, and the more you help your brain to grow, the stronger you get. When bullies come at you, when I say bullies, I'm talking about anybody who is trying to belittle you, like the mass media, the news, the government, or even organizations, or possibly bad parents, or possibly bad schools that try to teach you things that may or may not be true. Like, for example, you have evolution, you also have creation with intelligent design. And schools may give you one or the other, when really you should think about both of those possible things about where do we come from, who are we exactly. And I personally believe in creation of intelligent design because the world and the universe is too complex to be created by accident of a big bang and evolution and mutation and all those things. But when you go to school, you should be given that choice, that freedom to make your own decision in what you want to believe, and you should not just be told, well, this is the only possible way, that we're just products of evolution of the Big Bang, and there is no possible way that maybe we were designed from a designer and created by a creator. There's no way that we could be that complex, when really, when you look at the way we were made, or the way that we work, and how complex each cell is, and how one little cell or one little molecule is more complex than like a big city or the earth itself or the universe itself, and how complex everything is, and how if the earth was a little more farther away, we'd be too cold and life would not be sustained. Or if we were a little bit closer, if the earth was a little more closer to the sun, then we would be too hot and then life would not be sustained again. And it's crazy to think that it just so happened to be that way, that there were so many different things that had to be exactly right for life to happen, and for all these different things to happen, for us to start out, where we came from, how we started. It's crazy because, like, to create life to begin with, you need a lot of different things at the same time. You cannot start with, oh, you have one little thing, and then another thing was added, and then eventually life started. Because, for example, they've been trying to make life artificially in a lab, but they have not done it, and they tried it for like the past century or so. And they may argue in different books, on different TV shows, and and what have you, and they may say something about that, about whether or not they have been able to create life. But you should do your homework and think about this, and not just take my word for it, but to think, you know, have they been able to create life on their own? Has scientists been able to create life on their own in like a science lab? Have they been able to do that? Let me know in the comments below, or email me at originaloatmeal@gmail.com. But I do not think they have exactly created actual life. Even at the simplest level, I do not think they have been able to do that yet. And even if they have been able to create life in a lab, it's not the same as if life is created out in the real world, outside of a science lab, in outer space or on Earth. It's harder for life just to randomly happen, to be created, to be designed randomly, without a creator, without a designer, without a father, without somebody smarter to put it together. Because even in the computer lab, not the computer lab, but even in the science lab, you have people that are putting it together. You have this outside help from higher power, so to speak, called the scientists, who are acting as God himself, so to speak. The scientists are like designers and creators, and they're manipulating things and elements to make life. And so if they were to make life, it happened through the process of intelligent design, because it was the intelligent design of the scientists that made it possible for the life. And so you cannot say, oh, if the scientists were able to create life, then therefore nothing is also able to create life through the natural process of time, and give it enough time, it will happen, kind of thing. Because it's not fair to say, yeah, we were able to create life in a science lab through the help of scientists. Scientists in a science lab was able to make life, and therefore life is able to create itself randomly over time without the help of scientists, and without the help of a science lab and the different elements that were put together by the scientists, and not randomly put together by accident through natural processes. You can't just put the two together and say, oh, here it happened by design, and therefore it can happen without design. In other words, oh, if the scientists can create life in a science lab, then life can create itself without the scientists and without the science lab. But that's what people say, and they say, well, here we're doing an experience, we're doing an experiment, and if we're successful, it will prove that life can happen, that life can be created if, you know, these certain things come together in a certain way. Then we're pretty sure life can happen, and life can be created accidentally if these certain things just so happen to happen at the exact right way. But who's to say that those things would come together exactly in those ways ever, even if you give it enough time, like millions of years, would those exact things happen? Let me know in the comments below, or give me some video responses. And tell me if you're a scientist. Give it enough time, will it really happen? If you have like a watch, or the parts to make a watch, like to tell time, like a clock, will it make itself? Will the wind just blow the certain parts together, and it will come together, and then you'll have a clock or a watch that will work and tell time? Would that happen? Just give it enough time. Is it possible? What I'm trying to say is that life is complex. To make life, it's hard. And what is right and what is wrong is not always that clear. Everything in life is gray. Life is gray because we're color blinded, and we should be given more choices and freedom in life in what we choose to believe, in the things that we hear in the news, in life, in our personal lives, with our friends and families and other people we know or people around us, and in the news, in the world news, in the local news, in the national news, and in the things that we're taught in school. We should be given the choice. We should think about it. We should be given the tools so that we can make our own choices in what we believe in what happened in history, in the past, with evolution, creation, whether we want to believe in one thing or another, or maybe in both. But I prefer creationism of intelligent design. But you can believe what you want for whatever the reason, but you should think about it, and you should be given the tools, and board games help us with that process and helps us use our brain more. Puzzle games helps us in that thought process to help us use our brain more, and Tetris helps us. And I really like the music in the Tetris game, in the original Tetris game, or I think it's the original Tetris game on the Nintendo Entertainment System. They have like Mozart music, like classical music, and they say in studies, scientific studies, that classical music does things to the brain, and kind of redesigns uh, the brain to an extent, like kind of redesigns or like moves things around, in the thoughts, and how the thoughts move, because the thoughts are like radio waves in your brain, and it vibrates, and music can manipulate and change the vibrations of the thoughts, which could be for the worse or for the better. And if you have something that's more violent, like more violent kind of music, like rock music, heavy metal music, study shows that it changes the brain to an extent, and the radio waves of your thoughts, of your mental capacity and ability, and it kind of moves it around, and it may hurt it to different extents. And that's what I think based off what I've heard. And you can think what you want. But I really do like the music in Tetris, and I really like how it helps with the brain in solving puzzles. And so I recommend you playing some Tetris every once in a while in your life. Find some Tetris, find some puzzle games, do it to help your brain so that your brain does not fall off and die. So what do you think about your brain? Do you believe in lifelong learning? What do you think about evolution and creation? What do you think about the news and the government, and are they telling us enough, and did 9/11 really happen, and is Elvis really dead, is Michael Jackson really dead, And did man really land on the moon? Let me know in the comments below. And what should I talk about in the future? What kind of videos should I make in the future? What do you like and do not like in my videos? Let's let me know in the comments or email me at originaloatmeal@gmail.com or something, or run away from my videos altogether and never watch them again because it's already more than an hour long for just this video, this video game review. But that's what I'm gonna do. But please tell me, oh, that you want the videos to be shorter or longer or whatever. Let me know. You can say anything you want in the comments, even though I may not always like what you say. But you should think about telling me things, asking me questions, or telling me what I should do, giving me recommendations and feedback and suggestions and concerns. Let me know. And what do you like and do not like in Tetris and in puzzle games? Tell me what your favorite puzzle games are and brain games are. Let me know in the comments below because I want to collect a list of puzzle games, and I want to try new puzzle games, and I want to start playing new games to try to see if it will help my brain. And maybe it could help other people's brains too. They can read the comments and they can learn from you. So help a brother out and help the other people that may stumble across this video and the comments below the video. They could read your comment and learn from you, and they could try some of your suggestions on things they should do in their life or games they should play, like puzzle games and other things. Think about that. You can help others. Plant a tree, hug a tree, save a child, save a kid, help the world, save some people. With oatmeal in my bowl is Jesus in your soul.